So the warm-up, as I always allude to, should involve some pre-exercise mobilizations, activation of most of the major muscles, particularly those that are going to be involved in the exercise bout to follow, whether that's a strength session or swim, cycle, run, whatever it may be. But we should also be focusing on that warm-up being progressive as the session would be, but also we've got to potentiate the key muscles that are going to be required to do the business. Now, for my pre-exercise mobilization routine, all we're really looking at is doing some basic movements that are alerting the whole body to waking up. Personally, I always tend to start with a simple drill where I just basically slide myself across the floor using my toes and waking up the plantar fascia. Really super important if we're going to do a strength training routine where a lot of stuff we're going to be planting our feet, and we want to rely on that proprioception from the floor, but also if we're going for a run, swim, cycle where our feet are critical to locomoting the body, then we want to make sure that we're really waking up top to toe, head to toe. And you can see with myself here doing a few other movements at the same time just to kind of make the most of the time. Might seem quite dynamic from the off, but I'm a very mobile person. And whilst I'll go through these drills, I'll identify anything where I certainly could improve on, because I do, as I've alluded to before, carry a few injuries in the back hip, left shoulder reconstruction, amongst other bits and pieces. Nice simple drill there, just kind of hanging off the bar, just kind of a full body stretch, particularly through the lats, and then just going into some very brief sort of pec stretches here. Most of us could do with doing these regularly, just purely because of the postures we hold day to day, whether we're sitting at work, driving, but even running and sort of in the bike, especially if we're tucked up in an aerodynamic position or on the tri-bars. That's a real good mobility drill to be doing. And then I'm going into what's known as founders here. I'll do 2 or 3 of these. I'm really waking up through the posterior chain, so the musculature down the spine, and getting a little bit of glute firing at the same time. But it's a very basic exercise, and with time you can progress this until you can be able to get your arms over the top of the head like I did there. And then just from that position, going into some very easy leg mobilizations, knees to chest, and then heels to backside. So we're just getting some brief stretches as well as mobilizations through the key joints here. Feet up onto the desk now. So just good mobility through the hips and getting a little bit of a hamstring stretch there as identified with the hand, and same for the other leg. And then from there, just going to take myself and get a bit of ankle mobility going on. A very brief stretch through the calves and soleus. Whether you're doing it straight-legged or bent leg, make sure you get them both in there to hit both areas of the lower leg muscles. Again, we're not really too fussed about any great length of time doing these movements. Unless we are a novice, then we might want to spend more time working on it. But as I said, I'm more of an advanced athlete and doing these movements, this particular drill set for 10 minutes at least twice a day before every session. Now I'm just moving into some more dynamic leg lifts, another leg swing, so starting to get a bit more blood pumping in the legs, a bit more dynamism, some of these kickbacks with good glute activation there. And the great thing with one-legged drills is we're also, because we're testing our balance and proprioception at all times, we're actually starting to just fire up not just the brain but the core as well. So just some nice simple straight leg swings. So again, this might seem quite dynamic to some folk who struggle to get their legs in any way, to waist level or above. But remember, I'm doing these all the time, have done for many years. So not that I'm an expert or anything like that. I've certainly seen better than myself. But this is well within my own comfort limits, and easily, if I was going to go for a run or a cycle after this session, I'm easily working above the range that my legs are going to go through for any of those sessions. And that's what we're really after with these mobility drills. We want to really develop and enhance our movement efficiency, so that when we do go running, we do go cycling, making these excessive movements, if they're easy, then just our normal running stride, our running gait is going to be that bit easier. If we're going out the door, we've got loads of tightness, and we struggle to put one foot in front of the other because of those balls of tightness through the legs, then straight away that's going to impact the longer the run is. Just doing some simple straight leg raises here. So these are great just for building a little bit of strength into the hip flexors. A lot of people can't even get their legs straight up to 45 degrees, let alone nearer to 90. So that's a great drill to be working on. And then just moving into some woodpeckers here. So taking the arms out in front and at the same time trying to pull the hips back behind. So I'm getting a little bit of glute activation on that front leg. At the same time, still working down the posterior chain with regards to the spine, so the muscles down the back that support the spine. So this is another great exercise prior to going for certainly for a swim or a cycle, where we want these muscles to be awake and kicking in to keep good posture during the activity. And now going down onto the deck just to progress a little bit more now with the spine itself with regards to mobilising out to both sides. And again, you'll see I'm not spending any great length of time doing these movements. I'm just making sure I go through them so that I'm mobilising the body. Just working through the hips a little bit more there. I'm basically trying to make the most of every position that I'm carrying myself in. So if I go down to the floor, then I'm going to make the most of that time that I'm down there, linking the different movements together. And you'll see that by the time we come to the end of these 10 minutes, that we've actually taken my body through quite a few different planes of movement, both standing and in this sort of quadruped position. Trying to find neutral spine and going through some thoracic mobilizations now. I used to be really appalling at this a couple of years ago, but I've just been gradually building this thoracic mobility over time. Could still be better. Likewise, it could be a lot worse. So again, still working on this hip mobility now, but taking it from a different angle. So from before I was doing it in the upright position, now I'm working it on all fours. And what that does is, whilst you might think I'm going through the same plane of motion, which I am with some of these movements, but because my body's in a different position, I'm actually activating the muscles in a different way now. So particularly for swimmers, cyclists, this would be really worthwhile doing, getting into the all fours position for some of your activation, potentiation and mobility drills. And then from there, I'm going to get into now working on the mobility through my hip flexors, so one foot out in front of the other. I'm not switching on my glutes, I'm leaving them nice and relaxed so that I do actually get a decent mobilization. If I'm going too hard on my glutes and getting them to really tense up, then I'm actually locking the head of my femur into the hip socket, and I can actually end up preventing myself from developing that stretch. So find whatever works for you. Personally, I find that actually relaxing the glutes during these movements, I get so much more bang for my buck. So you can see there's 3 different progressions there, from the basic couch stretch right through to a nice long lunge stretch. Cool, so now I've done most of my mobilizations. I'm now starting to really focus on potentiating key muscles, the glutes being the primary one. So as you can see here, I've got a bit more of an advanced hip thrust technique here, 1 foot planted and then really driving up through the hooks, through the hips. One leg, then the other. Foot nicely planted flat on the floor, making sure I keep a nice neutral pelvis throughout that drill. Then I'm going to get up and start firing off the adductors. So I'll start off with some isometric reps. So just taking the foam roller, this could be anything, it could be a fist, a couple of books between your knees, and just doing some squeezes. Just nice gentle squeezes, nothing too much too soon, just starting to fire up the adductors. Tend to be very weak on a lot of people, especially endurance athletes. We don't tend to use them a great deal, even regular gym goers, unless they're doing a lot of lunges and step-ups. They very rarely have adductors that are up to speed with the rest of their main musculature. So again, you can see keeping it to one leg than the other, just using a simple band there, wrapped around a static piece of apparatus, and then half a dozen reps on each leg. And then from there, I'm going to sit myself down onto the desk, wrap a band around both ankles. I'm just going to start firing into my glute med and glute minimus a little bit more by doing some internal rotations, and that band is going to provide the resistance. I'm going to put a pen between my knee to start off with, just to give myself something more to focus on. Sometimes I'll just let the pen drop down and then focus on trying to keep a little gap in between my legs if I want to test myself a little bit more. I tend to do a few more reps of this because this is an area where I have noticed a lot of weakness in myself. And it's amazing the difference that's happened just over the last year, 18 months of that exercise. Some of the hip pain that I used to get has completely disappeared, and I find it important, as I mentioned earlier, my left hip that does play up a lot. That has eased off a lot now. Simple plank exercise there, not too fussed about people going overboard with the technique here, as long as your arse isn't halfway up to the ceiling or hips sagging all the way to the floor. We're just after a bit of trunk activation during this, holding it for 15 to 20 seconds if you can, and then going into some simple ab roll-ups now, so all the way forwards past the toes and then back under control, full extension behind and then coming back over again, 5 or 6 reps of this, nicely controlled the whole way through. You're going to get a little bit of foot slippage back and forth as you go back. What you don't want though is your feet going up over the back of your head, so really making sure that we can control ourselves during this movement, so we're not tucking our feet under anything. And this is something that some of you might just take your time with, starting off with smaller repetitions and then going for the full Monty when you can, and then from there just going into the bird dog exercise. So nice and slow and controlled initially, just one leg and one arm, alternate arm and leg going out, trying to keep the trunk nice and steady, firing the glutes, but also we're getting some nice activation right through the whole of the posterior chain as we do this. And you can see my last few reps, I'm really starting to get some dynamism into it, which forces you to engage that little bit more. And there we have it, warm-up routine over and done with. Easy.